career insight, industry expertise, and professional development. This is the Career Gurus podcast, your premier source for helping you navigate into a new career. Hosted by Daniel and Matthew. Podcasts are uploaded weekly on all platforms, so make sure you're subscribed.
Okay, episode 3 of the Careers Guru podcast, where we help you find insight into your next career. Daniel, how are you doing today?
Hey, Matt. Doing very well. Thanks. How are you guys?
Doing great. And today we have Louis Bojanek. Louis, how are you?
Doing well. Got to practice some volleyball this morning. It was good.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Well, how about you open up and tell us a little about what you do personally and for a career?
Yeah. Personally, like I said, I like to play beach volleyball. I'm interested in parkour, beekeeping, very active in my church. But for a career, I chose the path of funeral directing. A little bit of a different choice, but that was the path I took.
Right on. That's pretty sweet.
So, Louis, where are you calling in from today? Just so our viewers get a little bit of context.
Right now, I'm calling in from Rocky River, Ohio, but at the funeral home I worked at, it was in Mansfield, Ohio.
Right on. Talk to us a little bit about the beekeeping thing. I'm sure that's even something unique most people don't know about. I mean, I personally don't know anything about
it's
that.
for unique careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of just for fun. I've always had a fascination of animals, and I like honey too. So it made sense to get a hive of my own and see how the bees work together and the colony works together. It's very interesting creatures.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. Well, what brought you into that line of work, as you're the only person I know that has ever sought out a career in like the funeral industry? So
Yeah. Usually, like, you'll see people get into it when their parents do it, like a family-owned business, and the next son will just kind of take over and be a funeral director as well. But the draw to me was part of it was the uniqueness. Like, it was, you get to see an aspect of life that no other people really get to be that personal with. And when they do, they don't want to be, right? You don't want to experience death. But then also it was an opportunity for me to really help people going through a tough time. So that was the two hooks that pulled me in, I guess.
Were you wavering any other career choice or career path, or was this just like a one and done? You knew exactly what you wanted to do?
I'm not the most decisive guy. In high school, I was looking at I was thinking of possibly doing physical therapy. I was possibly doing like radiology or like a X-ray tech kind of thing. But then kind of looking into the school for funeral directing, and then kind of just for some reason I just kind of drifted towards that one over the other ones.
That's interesting. So give us a little bit of insight to how things work in the funeral industry. I mean, I'm sure people are, acquainted to how things go when they have a loved one that passes on in a way, but maybe just the operations of working at a funeral home, maybe, what's involved in behind the scenes that most people don't know about. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about it, so
I know nothing.
This is a first for me. Yeah.
There's a lot that happens behind the curtain. Do you want me just to kind of go in chronological of kind of the process of a case?
Start to finish.
That'd be awesome.
So as a funeral director, you have to be ready to respond via phone in case someone does pass away. And so that would involve either passing away at a hospital, passing away at home, like on hospice, or if it was more of a suspicious death, that would be through the coroner. So you always have to, not always, but someone on the funeral team has to be on call, ready to answer the phone. And who knows who's calling? It could be, an officer who has a situation under control and can give you the information you need to go forth with, or it could be, a wailing mother that, just walked in on something she never wanted to see. So you always have to kind of answer the phone with that unexpected of who's on the other end. You got to know you got to be able to answer the questions that individual has and know what questions you need answers. So vital statistics such as name, date of birth, social security number, where they are, and let them know that you'll be responding promptly. And then that will involve you, getting dressed up in your suit and going to the place of death to bring the loved one into the funeral home. When you usually you'll see the family there when you bring the body into your care, and from there you kind of get an idea of what kind of services they're interested in. If they're looking for a public viewing is kind of the big question, because the earlier you do your embalming process, the better condition the body will be in. The longer you wait, the more decomposition sets in and kind of wears away on the body, and you can't repair that. You're just preventing decomposition from happening when you embalm. So that's kind of the big question you're trying to draw, but you don't want to like go in there and be like, yo, do you want to embalm? Like, you kind of have to, mix that in with caring for them.
Real quick, what, not to interrupt, but what's the time frame of embalmment? Like, how long do you have before, like, per se, you can't embalm anymore?
Yeah. Again, it's more of just like what's more ideal, sooner rather than later. But depending on climate, depending on the cause of death, like did they have an open wound where the blood was flowing out, would cause the body to dry out quicker. So it's like there's a lot of factors. So it's typically you have maybe like a couple of days before things start to visibly change for the worse in the end result of the embalming.
Mm-hmm.
But if you bring them into, if you respond quickly and the family doesn't know, you can put them into the cooler, and that will slow down the decomposition factor as well. So you can give more time to the family to decide. So, yes.
So yeah, a couple things I wanted to follow up on. So you said there's two ways this could kind of go. There's kind of the natural cause of death. So the family would reach out to you, and then you'd offer your services to them and work with them to organize that. Or if there was a suspicious death, or a coroner has to be involved, I guess the coroner has to validate the time of death and write the death certificate and things like that before you guys could take over the body and own responsibility for that. So I guess talk us a little bit about those two scenarios. They both sound, they could go different ways, and I'm sure more is involved.
Yeah. So the coroner is called in on suspicious deaths. That includes, possible homicide, looking for a cause of death, possibly like if there's a certain disease that they're not certain of, or if they're just uncertain of the cause of death. And then also like if someone dies while at work, that's always a coroner's case, because there's always possibility of a lawsuit. So the coroner will be in contact with the family, and so the coroner will know which funeral home the family would like their services through. So the coroner will then kind of be like a middleman for a little bit until we bring the body to the funeral home. But if the coroner is involved, that does mean there is an autopsy, which drastically changes the embalming process when preparing the remains for a viewing, if that's what the family would like. If the coroner is not involved, it's just someone has to pronounce the individual as dead, whether that be a nurse or a doctor, or a police officer.
I see. So what kind of responsibility do you guys, own as, in the funeral home industry, over a dead body? Of course, I'm sure there's a lot of legal implications here. And even like you said, just working with an officer or a coroner to validate the death and write the death certificate. I mean, there's a lot of legal implications I'm assuming you guys have to take on here.
Yeah. There's you take 2 exams when you become, at least in Ohio, you had to take 2 exams, and they're both 2 parts. And one of the exams is just Ohio's laws of legalities of, certain situations, what you can, what you can't do, what you can get in trouble for, what you can't get in trouble for. Because it's very similar to doctors. There's a lot of personal information you have on file. Everyone that has gone through your funeral home, you have all of their social security numbers. I mean, that's like a gold mine for like scammers. But then you're also just dealing with such a sensitive situation. So like, not only is it a legal responsibility, but just like as a decent human being, you have the responsibility to be like sincere and very, you have to be very careful with the way you act and what you say around the family, until you kind of get to know what their kind of family culture is like and how they're kind of processing the death. So those are kind of the big responsibilities, is the legal aspects, and then the responsibilities you have to serve the family.
So that's super interesting. I have like 1,000 questions going through my head right now.
It hit me.
But I want to know, like, what does it take? Like, what's the process kind of leading into that, what you were saying, like the educational path that you have to take in order to become like in this industry, the role that you have? Like,
Yeah.
what's the path that it takes? And like, what do they teach you? My second part of the question is, what do they teach you around I can't call it a patient, a corpse security, right? Like information security. What do they teach you in that?
Yeah. So the path to take, it just depends on your state. For example, Colorado is crazy. You can just be 18 and be a funeral director, and then you have all this responsibility. So, but it's the caveat is the funeral home they'll hire only people they deem qualified. So they look for other qualifications. But most states require a bachelor's degree in kind of a mortuary science degree field, followed up by a year-long apprenticeship, which is this, you're a funeral director / embalmer. The only thing, you can't like sell a funeral, you can't bury someone, and you need so you need a funeral director present for either of those if you're going to do that. And then you need a funeral director present if you're going to embalm. And then after that, you have to pass your national and state boards exams. So Ohio was the most strict state. So I ended up having to go through the whole process, which was the nice part about that, I guess. If I ever wanted to move to a different state, I've done the work for the other states. It opens up those doors. But then with regards to the things they taught in school, really the school and stuff is more to get you to pass your boards exams. So it was more like embalming techniques, like chemistry, anatomy, understanding how diseases affect the body, and then like business stuff. Whereas the more professional stuff you learned in your apprenticeship and just from your funeral directors that you work with.
So how many years commitment are you looking at in order to enter into this industry?
Yeah. So again, we'll just go off of Ohio. That's the most commitment.
Sure.
It is a bachelor's degree. There is a route to take where it's only 3.5 years of schooling though, rather than like a full 4-year degree, and then a year-long apprenticeship. So, but it's a paid apprenticeship, and typically you can find an apprenticeship that pays substantially well. So it's not like that's like a loss of a year, really.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about the business courses that you take in regards to entering into the funeral industry. Well, what all those entail, right? I've taken business courses myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're one for one with what you're doing.
It might surprise you. It's a lot of accounting,
Really?
a lot of marketing, right? It's because you're, so following along down the train, you brought the body back to the funeral home. You got to call the family to schedule time to meet with them to plan the services. So from there, you're selling a funeral, you're selling a casket, you're selling your services, you're selling, you're showing what value you have to offer, and that's all marketing.
Right.
And then after that, you got to make sure you're the funeral directors are the people that work there. You don't have accountants, you don't have like you might have a secretary, but usually the funeral director is the one doing the paperwork too. So once the family leaves, you go back, you type everything up into the databases to make sure everything is balanced and checked out right, and is into like a big database so that you can just click on each family's kind of case and it pops up, and so everyone can help out on the same case.
Okay, that's super interesting to me, right? Like a couple more questions on my end, like. Is this mainly driven by like mom and pop style operations, or is there corporate entities that have entered into this space?
It's a East Coast, West Coast split. East Coast is definitely mom and pop shop kind of style. You'll have the owner, his children will be like manager kind of more, but they're all funeral directors. They all embalm, they all run funerals. And then you have maybe a couple people that you hire to help out. Whereas if you look at like West Coast, so I actually lived and worked in a morgue in Colorado. and that building we just embalmed and did the cosmetics and prepared the bodies for 9 different funeral homes throughout the state of Colorado. So it was wild. It was like a factory, like just in and out.
Wow.
But out there, it's all corporate. You have people who do the paperwork, people who only embalm, people who only meet with the families. Like it's a weird divide. I don't know how that came to be, but that there's definitely a divide.
That is so sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. So just to follow up on that. So it's either ranges from a small operation, 3 to 4 people, like a family, like you're saying, or it gets involved with larger institutions, and each kind of task and role is broken down maybe into, I guess, multiple different locations or multiple different functions.
For sure. Now, the funeral home I worked at in Mansfield, it had they have, I think it's over like 15 different funeral homes now. So there's like 3 or 4 brothers who manage like regions, like kind of based off of counties. And then a lot of their children or a lot of people that they hired on. So each funeral home will have, 3 to 4 directors per funeral home, but they kind of all work under this umbrella family. So that's kind of as corporate as it gets while still being, family owned.
It's super interesting to me, like kind of dominating a marketplace with a funeral industry, something you really don't think about. You kind of mentioned a little bit about stuff with a computer. Like, do you guys use a specific software that manages this?
There's a couple of different ones. Like, there's 2 softwares we used. One was Abacus, and that was used to generate death certificates. So when we meet with the family, we have to get all the information to fill out the death certificate, and then we send it to the doctor for them to be signed. And then I'm pretty sure every funeral home uses that. It's kind of like standard, but then it's kind of more like, this software is more set up this way, which is easier, like kind of preference based. Like, you might like this one over this one, but those ones are more for just keeping track of like, okay, so Jane Doe wants a full service funeral with this oak casket, whereas, Billy Johnson's family wants just a direct cremation. So it kind of like just catalogs. So you just pull up their account. If that's kind of more the purpose of the other software.
Okay, interesting.
All right, so kind of follow up on that. It sounds like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of inner workings that people don't really see. So what would you say the most challenging part of your job is? And then to follow up on that is, what would be the most rewarding part of your job?
Yeah. For me personally, the most challenging part was the schedule. You have to keep a cell phone on you and be ready and a suit in your trunk, because you never know when that call is going to come that you have to go and, go to someone's bedside and bring their loved one into their care. So you always have to be prepared to, drop what you're doing. Could be, your son's championship baseball game, but you got to be ready to drop what you're doing and, put this other family above your own. That's a huge sacrifice that you'll see that sacrifice in like EMS and like, ambulance and police officers. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, that's a massive sacrifice that they do. But funeral directors also have that same sacrifice. I do think they're a little underappreciated in that end. And then the best, most rewarding part was always, when you do this job because you do a good job of it, and then you can really, as a professional, help this family get through a tough time. And so like receiving a hug, thank you at the end was always incredible. Even if you just like set up flowers, like you didn't do anything other than set up flowers for that family, like you're on doing other stuff that day, like, and you catch that hug, it's like, you could tell how much it means to them. And that was awesome.
So this job really is like a 24/7 kind of commitment. Hey, like you got to be ready to go any hour of the day, any day of the week.
That's definitely an aspect of the family owned, yep. Right? Because there's only 4 of you splitting, all time of the week. Whereas if you do go the corporate route, you're able to, this team specifically goes and brings the bodies to the funeral home. So if you're willing to have that life schedule, you can be on that team. But if you're not, you're your schedule is more set.
So yeah, I guess the trade-off is the demand, the hours of work, the availabilities. It's constant, like you're saying, you're working around the clock, but the trade-off is you feel good helping someone, and I'm sure it means a lot to the families that knowing that their loved ones are taken care of, and the whole process is taken care of, as it's a challenging time anyway for them.
Yeah, and that was for me. Like, I know a lot, I'm sure for majority of people in the world, was stomaching the things you see. Like, that would be a huge turnoff to this career.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the same reason why not everyone wants to be like nurses or surgeons, right? There's, you see some stuff that is a little tough to stomach. And then, but then you also, another thing that is really rewarding is, like you're a figure in the community, right? Like people have questions about death, and people, everyone remembers their funeral director if they do a good job. And so you kind of like have this sense of like a figure in the community.
It's really interesting, actually. Kind of leading into that, I do have a handful of questions I want to get to, but since you're on that topic, like, what is it like being surrounded in that all day? Like, for the listeners, right? Like, the question I like to ask is, like, does this have a taxing on your emotions in any regard? Do you become desensitized to death, obviously, or what is that like just from an emotional standpoint?
I think it hits people differently. I got desensitized. I feel like I could work with 4 or 5 dead bodies around me all day, like preparing and embalming and or listen to a family talk about their loved one that passed away. And then once I got back home, I was just my regular self, and it didn't affect me. There was only one situation that really kind of hit me pretty hard. But for the most part, I was able to just kind of dissociate from it. I think the same answer would be said by surgeons as well in that aspect. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, just to see like how it was. Like, did you start viewing things differently, like just your line of work, or were you able like to basically just turn off work and turn on personal life?
Yeah, I mean, when I wasn't on call, I was able to turn off work.
Okay.
But when I was on call, my phone made sure I was still on work mode. But though, like, perspective wise, as a Christian, I've always had a understanding that I'm not immortal, right? Like,
right.
I know I'm gonna die, and depending on whether I put my faith in Jesus, I'll either end up in heaven or hell. That was always a reality to me. So the aspect of like facing death every day like wasn't like a new concept to me. It was definitely like something I've pondered from at a younger age, I guess. So for like, I know for like a lot of my classmates that weren't like super religious, like that was kind of like, that was almost like a wall they had to break through. Whereas, me and like a friend of mine was Catholic, like us religious kind of people, like that was something we've already faced in our lives.
Now, is that something that you are taught to lead into when giving? Obviously, there's an emotional support factor to, we'll call them clients coming in, right?
Sure.
Like, is that something that you're taught throughout your education, or is that more like boots on the ground type of understanding how it all works?
Definitely the things they're taught are more like psychological, like, kind of, I don't know how real it is, but like, the stages of grief and stuff, you're kind of taught that sort of thing. And like, just why a human longs for something, and the effects of longing and not, having something and then losing something. That's grief. Right. Is the experience of loss, not necessarily like a death. It's the loss, and how that affects a person, and like how to kind of notice like how a person's doing, and tailor the way you respond to that. But my funeral home was owned by Christians, so they were like very open to like, if you knew the family especially was like Christian, like, having faith be a part of your job for sure. And like, I took it as an opportunity to like pray for these families every night. Like that was something cool that I was able to do. And also like I don't think that matters if you're, you could be in a very corporate setting where they're like, no religion, like, unless they want like, Christian service or this service, that service, you could still pray for them at home. Like I think that's a cool opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. It kind of opens up a few more questions. Like when you obviously, like, there's Christian people that come through the funeral home, but what about other religions, right? How do you accommodate that? Is there different I don't want to call them programs, but is there different portfolios you sell, or like how is that done? Because clearly, like working in Ohio, right? There's different cultures that come through.
Yeah.
I'm just curious of how you would cater to each different one.
Yeah. So I kind of cheated. Being in Mansfield, Ohio, it's a very Christian predominant area. So pretty much every family you could like cast a wager that they're Christian and make a huge profit. But even so, apostolic Christian versus Lutheran, like those things, that the services do look very different. And so knowing which church they go to, more importantly than really what their religion, because even, this Catholic church versus that Catholic church, one is going to be like, these people do the things this way, whereas in this other Catholic church, they might have a little bit more leeway to kind of customize their service. So knowing it's more important to know the norms of your local churches, rather than knowing a vast majority of religions. In school, we learned like the basics of each of the religions, but you kind of, in your apprenticeship, you definitely, that's important, is to learn each church that's in your area.
That's interesting. Yeah, very, very cool. So I got to ask, the funeral industry is definitely competitive. It's costly. So what can someone expect to earn, financially in a career like this? And what are the career growth opportunities?
Yeah. It's a dying business. Stupid joke, but no, it really is. Like there are.
I actually believed you for a second. So.
I know, I genuinely like said it, and I was like, shoot, I made one of those stupid puns. I hate when people do that. And I was like, but no, every funeral director has kids. Not every funeral director's kids get into the industry, and there's the amount of people, the amount of kids that don't, pass on the tradition does not live up to the amount of people entering from, different families. So it's getting smaller, kind of, as the pool is getting smaller of funeral directors. So if you do choose this route, like, it's not super competitive. Like, you're kind of valued. You kind of get to pick and choose which funeral home you want to. If you are valuable, like if you do well, you're an earnest person. You do the little things right, you're golden. And you can make some decent money. Like I think that for Ohio, the average is like for your first year after your apprenticeship, like as a licensed director, it was like around 62,000 for your first year. Mm-hmm. And the promise is, especially family owned, is, depending on how you enter, is that you may own it someday, and that's where like the big bucks come in. Is when you're the owner.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's very, very interesting. And I guess obviously funerals, the cost for the services ranges from, a variety of different price points. So it's, I guess how busy your practice or how busy your business is where those margins could come into play. And like you said, people can work the way up into owning the business one day. So that's probably the top of it.
Absolutely.
So I guess what advice would you give to someone wanting to enter this industry, this job, I guess this career path?
Yeah. There's actually quite a bit of opportunity to do stuff before you get licensed. They need help with people opening doors during calling hours, and that will, anyone can open a door, but you'll learn how to like interact in that setting, how to be professional, and at least get you to become a familiar face of that funeral home. One step further, I would say, would be to enter onto the team that does bring the loved ones into the funeral home when someone dies. So if it's a hospital death, if it's a nursing home, typically there's nurses that can help transport the body onto the cot. So they're able to send just one person. So if they have the manpower to spare, the funeral home will usually have the funeral director answer the call and then give the information to this part-time staff to respond and bring the body to the care. When there is a death at a house and the family is present, then one of the part-time members would go with a funeral director so that the funeral director could answer the questions. And then typically there's not like a nurse to help. So it does help to have another pair of hands to transport the body onto the cot. So that's a huge thing. You'll get used to being on call. You'll see how funeral directors interact with families in that setting. That's a huge thing to do to kind of get a feel for the job. And then what I did is, you got to have the right situation, but I had a cousin living in Colorado. So between semesters, I moved out with him since they had looser laws of what you can do when you're not licensed. I was able to work at this morgue, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I learned like the embalming process hands-on. I learned how to apply cosmetics and do hair, and I just kind of had a lot of hands-on experience that way. So again, that's not as realistic for most people, but you can look for stuff like that.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And like you said, you laid out the path there pretty clearly. So yeah, on to our one final question. If you could, would you do it all over again, or would you choose a different path?
The schedule is brutal. And the things you see can be brutal. But the help that you give to others is so meaningful. Another big appeal is it's interesting, right? Like I people watch crime series, dramas, they watch like that kind of stuff, and you get to hear and see crazy stories unfold, and that's definitely an aspect of it. But it's more so like the draw is being able to help people. For me personally, the schedule was brutal. And then when I was at the funeral home, I was kind of looking at like, what was I doing to real people? Was it really that I was, that I had the skills to embalm a body and make the person look well for their calling hours? Yes, the family greatly appreciate it, but it was also, me just having like a very gentle and compassionate demeanor towards the family, holding the door open for people, as simple as it seems, like the super small things that you could do at any place. And so it's kind of, to me, that realization and the schedule brutality was like, made me want to do something else.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Lewis, we appreciate your time. Thanks for teaching us about the industry. And I'm sure our listeners learned a lot, because I sure learned a lot. So we appreciate your time. We'll have this podcast out on Spotify and YouTube for anyone else wanting to check it out and share it with their friends. And once again, Lewis, we appreciate your time. Matt, do you have anything else?
No, that's it. Learned a lot myself. So hopefully get you on the call again sometime and learn more how your career has progressed.
Sure. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Lewis, appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening.